Om Tavakatamram Tapta Jivanam Kaviviridhitam Kalmashapaham Sharamanangalam Srimadatam Bhuvananti Bhuriradi. Your words are like nectar, bringing life to scorched souls. They are praised by poets and remove all sin. They are auspicious to hear, wonderful and exalted. Those who spread these words throughout the world are truly giving souls. Welcome, everyone, to our class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. We're just finishing the chapter The Master and M. It's Saturday, September 22nd, 1883, and we're on page 292. This is an interesting section because we get a preview to a whole chapter that advice to Ishan. And without reading this, we don't fully understand and appreciate why Ishan got such a big scolding at that time. Because it seems like he had this plan to do this Vedic chanting, this Gayatri, this Purushan, and other ritual things for a full year. And Thakur was telling him that these things are not appropriate, that he should do something. Anyhow, he's had a full year of not listening to Thakur, so he gets a little bit of a scolding letter. But we'll see many of the things that he will say to him later will also come in this section. But he loved Ishan. We have to remember that. Ishan was a very, very good person, a very generous person. And I mentioned last time his son and Swamiji were close friends and classmates. So here we finished. Sri Ramakrishna had heard that Ishan was building a house on the bank of the Ganges for the practice of spiritual discipline. He asked Ishan eagerly, "Has the house been built?" This was Thakur's suggestion. He told people many times to do this. "Let me tell you that the less people know of your spiritual life, the better it will be for you." Now, this is the same Ishan that's going to be doing this practice right on the steps of the Kali temple for everyone to see. Devotees endowed with sattva meditate in a secluded corner or in the forest or withdraw into the mind. Sometimes they meditate inside the mosquito net. So that was the last thing we read last time. Now and then, Ishan invited a Hazra to his house. We know about Hazra also, that he was not exactly a troublemaker, but sometimes he would criticize the young boys and Thakur for not doing enough of japa and everything, and he had his own views about non-dualism and everything. So Thakur was surrounded by these people, Hridoi worse, and Hazra and others that they had their own agenda. We can say. Hazra had a craze for outward purity. Sri Ramakrishna often discouraged him in this. Shuchibai, Master to Ishan, let me tell you another thing. Don't be over-fastidious about outward purity. Thakur had a little saying that there were three people who will have trouble getting God realization. Anybody remember? One is this Shuchibai, those who are too involved with his ritualistic purity and everything. They're Bankamon, yeah. Those who have a crooked mind. And one more. Those who are very doubting people. Samshayatma. Yeah. Samshayatma. Yeah. Thakur, he didn't want us to not observe things at all, but just there were people who made a craze out of it. We know especially Holy Mother's niece, Nalini. But there are many, many people like that, and always bathing and always, there's an expression that Shadhu Morikeye, Voishto Morineye. Sometimes other in other words, in Vaishnava, but the sadhus eat themselves to death, and the Vaishnavas bathe themselves to death, constantly bathing. Once a sadhu felt very thirsty. A water carrier was carrying water in his skin water bag and offered the water to the holy man. Now, it may be one of these stories about Shankaracharya, I'm not sure. And this skin water bag, this usually means Muslim, huh? Yeah, they were the ones, that was the practice. I've seen it, that there'll be some type of gold or something, it'll be clean, the skin and everything, but they'll be able to just kind of open it up and the water will come out, and yeah, I don't know what they call it, some name for it. And offered the water to the holy man. The sadhu asked if the skin was clean. The carrier said, "Revered sir, my skin bag is perfectly clean, but inside your skin are all sorts of filthy things. That is why I can ask you to drink water from my skin. It won't injure you. By your skin, the carrier meant the body, the belly, and so forth. Have faith in the name of God. Then you won't need even to go to holy places." Yeah, what did Holy Mother tell Nalini? That first of all, see, little things. I think once some crow droppings fell on her or something, and oh my God, this is a horrible thing. Had to go and bathe in the Ganges and wash her cloth and everything. Then Holy Mother said it'll be enough to sprinkle a little water, and then finally said, "Touch me." That'll be enough to purify everything. So for Thakur, taking the name of God, that'll take care of everything also. I remember once, when I lived in Kojabad that one year, there was a little knock on the door one morning, and I see this man standing there looking so helpless and everything. And he pointed to his head. Some crow had dropped, some dropping on his head. What could he do, the poor man? So I let him in, and he could wash himself off and everything. He was so distraught over that. It happens with crows. I had another very funny experience. I was in D.C. with some devotees, and we were watching. It was just dusk. It was very nice and everything. And this big flock of geese goes overhead, and as if we're thinking, just Thakur had went into ecstasy, seeing something like that, and just fantastic, honking and going over her head. And then one of them plopped right in my head. Sri Ramakrishna sang, intoxicated with divine fervor. This was one of his favorite songs. Why should I go to Ganga or Gaya, to Kashi, Kanchi, or Prabhas, so long as I can breathe my last with Kali's name upon my lips? Ishan remained silent. Master to Ishan, tell me if you have any more doubts. Ishan, you said everything when you spoke of faith. Master, God can be realized by true faith alone. Vishwash. This Vishwasa. I don't know if faith is the best word to use to translate it. I think of it as conviction. Faith, sometimes we're told to have faith or belief, to have faith in something that we don't really understand, or that we doesn't seem logical to us. Just have faith, just believe it. This is the opposite. This is something that we think about very deeply, that we examine, that we look at the logic of it, and observe other people, and we develop some very deep conviction of the truth of it. Our Swami Swanji used to say that this Vishwa, this conviction itself, is a type of realization, that we become so convinced of the truth of the scriptures, or the existence of God, or the divine presence within, and we can almost feel it. So for Thakur, this was one of the last steps on the stairs to get to the roof. This and Bakulata, they're a little bit different. Huh? a little bit different. But they can come from it. If we have such a deep conviction that exists, that God is real, then that yearning will come for it. So Thakur Swamiji also used to give the example that there's a man who's a professional thief, and he's in a room, and he finds out that there's a tremendous amount of gold in the next room, and he believes it. He has that belief. He knows that it's absolutely true. There's no doubt about it. So that tremendous longing to get the gold comes in, and tremendous effort to burrow through and dig through the wall and everything. So faith and conviction and this longing for God can also go together. Master, God can be realized by true faith alone, and the realization is hastened if you believe everything about God. Now, what does this mean, to believe everything about God? I was thinking about this. I was wondering. I think it means that, as Thakur says, that don't restrict your understanding to God, that he can only be this and not that. To believe that God can be with form and without form. God can take various forms. God can be personal, impersonal, can reveal himself in different ways. We can realize God through different paths. To accept all of these things. See the truth in all the schools of Vedanta, Sankhya, and everything. Something like that. So the realization is hastened if you believe everything about God, not every piece of nonsense. It doesn't mean that, but all the different possible views that all have some value to them. The cow that picks and chooses its food gives milk only in driblets, but if she eats all kinds of plants, then her milk flows in torrents. Once I heard a story. A man heard the command of God that he should see his ideal deity in a ram. He at once believed it. It is God who exists in all beings. A guru said to his disciple, "It is Rama alone who resides in all bodies." The disciple was a man of great faith. Once a dog snatched a piece of bread from him and started to run away. He ran after the dog with a jar of butter in his hand and cried again and again, "Oh Rama, stand still a minute. That bread hasn't been buttered." Now, I think this is a story about Pabhari Baba. Satubhai? No? Any other similar stories to that? There's one very nice. You know about this Pabhari Baba? He was considered to be a very great holy man at that time. Swamiji went to see him after Thakur passed away. Many of our monks also went to see him. Very highly regarded as a very genuine holy man. And there was one story about him that a thief broke into. He lived in a place, it was a house, but the basement was more like a cave. So there was a door or something in the structure, but inside, I haven't been there. I think people go there, Ghazipur, near Varanasi. Anyhow, a thief came in and stole some pots and pans. And as he was going out, he started running because he saw Pabhari Baba and dropped one or two. So Pabhari Baba grabbed the ones that he had dropped, and ran after him and finally caught him and said, he said, "Oh Lord, you dropped two of these. Please take these as well." Something like that. Now, this story was told to Swamiji, and he said, "What happened to that man?" He said, that man, after that, seeing this love of Pabhari Baba and everything, he renounced everything and became a sadhu. So Swamiji said, how do you know about all this? He said, "I am that man." Yeah, so he actually met that sadhu, the one who was the thief and everything. Yeah. So don't spoil my ending.
Got excited.
Try to make it dramatic. Yeah. Oh, it's dramatic for Swamiji. Then can you imagine that? You hear the story and find that is it really true? Just seeing this man once after being a thief, that someone renounces everything and becomes a sadhu. He said, "Yes, it's true. I was that thief." So it's a nice story. What tremendous faith Krishna Kishore had. He used to say, by chanting Om Krishna, Om Rama, one gets the results of 1,000,000 sandhyas. This sandhya is a very formal Vedic ritual that goes with this chanting of the Gayatri 3 times a day and everything. This is what Ishan wanted to do. This sandhya and repetition of Gayatri. Once he said to me secretly, this is Krishna Kishore, I don't like the sandhya and other devotions anymore, but don't tell anyone. He was supposed to be, the Orthodox Brahmin, I'm sure, and they were supposed to like these things, to do these things. Sometimes I too feel that way. The mother reveals to me that she herself has become everything. One day I was coming from the pine grove toward the Panchavati. A dog followed me. I stood still for a while near the Panchavati. The thought came to my mind that the mother might say something to me through the dog. We know how Thakur fed the cat, huh? And the food that was meant to be offered in the Kali temple. Cats wander around in those areas, happened to wander there, and Thakur saw and thought, oh, mother has come in the form of the cat. Let me offer the food that way. This may be the same cat, the cat story, that there was a cat who used to practically live in Thakur's room and would come and lie down at his feet, very devoted to Thakur. And Thakur was very nervous, what will happen to this cat after he dies, or if he ever leaves there or something. So this, what is her name? Nishtarani Devi, who was a very wonderful soul, very high, greatly devoted to Thakur. Thakur loved her so much, and she had some very high spiritual experiences. He asked her to take the cat, and you take this cat and make sure that it's fed nicely and that no harm comes to it. So it may be that same cat that he fed. Of course, we don't know. You were absolutely right when you said that through faith alone one achieves all, Ishan. But we are householders. Master, what if you are? This was always the plea. This is always the remark that was made by the householder devotees, as if that meant that they have no hope, that they can't realize God. We're householders, as if we're bound hand and foot. The same things that bind the householder bind the sannyasins, because it's the mind. Everything is the mind. So Thakur was always encouraging them. So what? What if you're a householder? That they can also realize God. All of you can. So he says, what if you are? Through his grace, even the impossible becomes possible. Ram Prasad sang, this world is a mere framework of illusion. Another man composed a song by way of reply. This other man, he was, of course, Ram Prasad was a worshiper of Divine Mother. This other man was a worshiper of Krishna, the Vaishnava. I never remember his name, some Goswami. Anybody know? No. And he was a thorn in the side of Ram Prasad, because Ram Prasad would compose songs, and he would almost on the spot compose a song that would contradict everything that he said. What is it? Aju Goswami. Yeah. Okay. So he's the one who wrote this. It wasn't just another man. It was they would do that. They would have sometimes these little kind of song fests, song-offs. When one would compose something, the other would compose something, and one would contradict the other. It was a way. What is it called? Kobi Larai. So there's a battle of the poets, we can say. A battle of the poets, something like that. So anyhow, this wasn't in a formal setting, but there's other Goswami, he would go around doing that. But for some reason, even though Thakur loved Ram Prasad songs, he liked the answer song better, the Goswami song better. The other thing that's interesting is that one Ram Prasad song Thakur hated. This mother, put on your clothes. He said, stop, what nonsense is that?
Was that Ram Prasad song?
That's also a Ram Prasad song. It's a nice song, but anyhow. Another man composed a song by way of reply. This very world is a mansion of mirth. It is a beautiful song. They both are, actually. Here I can eat, here drink, and make merry. Janaka's might was unsurpassed. What did he lack of the world or the spirit? Janaka, of course, is the highest example and the one that's almost always pointed to of the householder, someone who's uh, responsible for an entire kingdom, being a God-realized soul, perfect soul. What did he lack of the world or the spirit? Holding to one as well as the other, he drank his milk from a brimming cup. One should first realize God through spiritual discipline and solitude, and then live in the world. Okay, now, what do we do with a statement like this? Huh? If we take this seriously, no one will live in the world. Maybe you one out of hundreds of thousands will realize God, and then will they actually go back and live in the world? I take this a little bit in a broader sense, because sometimes he'll use the exact same language, except he'll say one should first attain devotion, bhakti, and then live in the world. So I think that we can take it that way. Otherwise, it's too high a standard. That to wait until we all have samadhi or God realization before we start with a career and family and all of that is it's a little unrealistic. It's a good advice for some of the people that come to him, maybe these Ishwarakotis and others, but for most people. So I like this other one better. That first develop some devotion, get established in spiritual life, get some detachment and dispassion and real devotion and everything, and then no harm in living in the world, carefully living in the world, that the body won't get stained constantly with the dirt of the world. Otherwise, it's very tough. This one should first realize God through spiritual discipline and solitude, and then live in the world. Only then can one be a king, Janaka. When people would point to Janaka and say that he realized God through karma alone, Thakur would say, but he must have done so much of austerities before that. How much he stood with his head on the ground and his feet in the air, and make statements like that. What can you achieve otherwise? Further, take the case of Shiva. This would be, of course, from the Puranas. He has everything: Kartika, Ganesha, Lakshmi, and Saraswati. Still, sometimes he dances in a state of divine fervor, chanting the name of Rama, and sometimes he is absorbed in samadhi. So he's telling us that Shiva was also a householder. Of course, we think of him as the ideal sannyasi, completely detached from everything, but he had his family. Okay, that's the end of that chapter. Now we start Instruction to Vaishnavas and Brahmos. This is Sunday, September 23rd, 1883. Sri Ramakrishna was sitting in his room at Dakshineshwar with Rakal, M, and other devotees. Hazara sat on the porch outside. That was his spot. That's where he was almost always found sitting there with his japamala in his hand, making a little display of everything and talking about high philosophy. Sometimes our Narendra would go and sit with them. They were also friends. They would chat about things and everything. And as Hazara, sometimes he would try to get money out of people because he had some debt. So he was an interesting character. But he had some vairagya also, some spirit of renunciation. He had left his family. He had his family back in the village. His poor mother, his mother was always begging, please send him back just for a couple of days so we can see him. But he's stubborn also. Master to a devotee. Narendra doesn't like even you nowadays. To him, why didn't he come to see me at Adhar's house? Now, this does not like. I think this probably means that he was going through that phase in which some go through in spiritual life when they seek solitude. They don't want anything to disturb the mood of the mind. They like to just go inward and deep and not even have to hold conversations with people. We find it with some of the others also. This our Swami Shivananda, this Tarak. He went through periods like that. We read about Hari, or Swami Turiana, how he stopped coming to Sri Ramakrishna because he was spending all of his time in meditation and everything. So it's a stage or a phase that devotees go through sometime when they really don't care for anybody's company. They just want to have solitude and dive deep within. And Thakur appreciated that also. Why didn't he come to see me at Adha's house? How versatile Narendra is. Thakur loved to praise him. He is gifted in singing and playing on instruments, in playing on instruments and in studies. He is independent and doesn't care about anybody. The other day, he was returning to Calcutta with Captain in his carriage. This Captain, this is our Upadhyay. He was something to do with the Nepali government official or something. Captain begged Narendra to sit beside him, but he took a seat opposite. He didn't even look at Captain. What can a man achieve through mere scholarship? What is needed is prayer and spiritual discipline. Gauri of Indesh was both a scholar and a devotee. He was a worshipper of the Divine Mother. Now and then he would be overpowered with spiritual fervor. When he chanted a hymn to the Mother, the pundits would seem like earthworms beside him. I too would be overcome with ecstasy. At first, he was a bigoted worshipper of Shakti, Divine Mother. He used to pick up tulsi leaves with a couple of sticks so as not to touch them with his fingers. These are sacred for the Vaishnavas, worshippers of Krishna, especially. All laugh. Then he went home. When he came back, he didn't behave that way anymore. He gave remarkable interpretations of Hindu mythology. He would say that the 10 heads of Ravana represented the 10 organs. Kumbhakarna was the symbol of tamas, Ravana of rajas, and Bibhishana of sattva. That was why Bibhishana obtained favor with Rama. Now, I wanted to just give us a little more background about this Gauri Pandit, because he played an important role in this divine play of Sri Ramakrishna. This place, Indesh, it's actually a village of Indash, and it's in Bankura. So that means that it's not far from Sri Ramakrishna's, from Kamarpukur, from his area. And yeah, he was a follower of this heroic mood of the Shakti tradition, and he had some special powers, some siddhis. In 1865, he was invited to Dakshineshwar by the Brahmini. That was when they were trying to determine what the real stature of Sri Ramakrishna was. The Brahmini was convinced that this state of madness he was going through was a divine madness, and she was equipped with evidence from the scriptures and other things. She wanted to invite all these pundits and let them give the final word for it. So he was one of the ones. He was invited to that. And he proclaimed very strongly that Thakur was an avatar. Then he spent a good deal of time with Sri Ramakrishna, and he lost all of his interest in scholarship and people praising him and everything, and these powers that he had, and he started devoting himself to real spiritual practice. So he became very much devoted to Sri Ramakrishna and charmed by his different moods. And then gradually, this tremendous feeling of renunciation came upon him, and this tremendous longing for God realization. So one day, it says, with tears in his eyes, he went and took leave from Sri Ramakrishna, and he renounced his home. He was a householder. He renounced everything and went off. And it says that even after a long search, that no one was able to find out anything about this Gauri Pandit. So We have different examples. Some of these great pundits, after coming in contact with Sri Ramakrishna, how they left the world, and they really gave up all this interest in the scholarship. To be a pundit in India at that time was no joke. Generally, any one field they would study for 12 years to be considered having expertise in the one field. Some of them would do it for 4 different fields or something like that, and so it was no joke. So naturally, they had tremendous pride, and of course, fantastic Sanskrit scholars. They would have to know all of that. Uh, so he gave up everything. He just through the touch of Sri Ramakrishna. After the master's midday meal, while he was resting, Ram, Tarak, now this is our Swami Shivananda, and some other devotees arrived from Calcutta. Nitya Gopal, Tarak, and several others were staying with Ram, a householder disciple of the master. In those days, even today, I imagine in certain households, thing with big sprawling households, they didn't mind relatives would come and show up one day and stay for 6 months or 2 years or something, or some friends, relatives, just devotees would come. His house was a little bit like that because it's Nitya Gopal and Tarak. They both stayed there. It says they were staying with Ram. They were living with him, really. And then they would take off and go someplace else. They didn't have much of a fixed place or anything. That's why the Tarak was one of the first to move into the Baranagar Mutt. He didn't have any real place of his own. He didn't care for his family home. He agreed to marry for the sake of his sister. It's a long story, but anyhow, his wife died before they really lived together as man and wife. So he was a free soul. So and his Ram was very, of course, very devoted to Sri Ramakrishna. So anyone who was a devotee, he was happy if they stayed there. Latu, of course, Latu and us, but he stayed there as his servant boy. And as soon as Thakur said that, oh, that boy Latu, I like him. It'll be nice if he comes and serves me a little bit. So Ram said, good, fine. So that's how he ended up staying with Sri Ramakrishna, and of course became a great saint himself. So Nitya Gopal, Tarak, and several others were staying with Ram, a householder disciple of the master. Nitya Gopal was always in an exalted spiritual mood. Thakur sometimes said the mood of a Paramahamsa, but never became a part of this real inner circle after Thakur passed away. He had his own kind of following. Tarak's mind, too, was always indrawn. He seldom exchanged words with others. Ram looked, and he was always grave. And one very nice thing that we see in our order, that many of these great sadhus, great sannyasins, are very, very grave and strong and hard types. When they become vice president or president, overnight they become very soft. They start giving initiation, getting disciples, and we see he was like that. He'd be very sweet and loving afterwards. Before that, he was a little grave. People were a little afraid to approach him and everything. Ram looked after their physical needs. Rakal now and then spent a few days at Adhar's house. So Adhar, because he just recently showed up within the past year, we became so close. And of course, Rakal also stayed very often at Balram Bose's house. That was part of his in-laws' family. Ram to the master. We have been taking lessons on the drum. Master to Ram. Nitya Gopal too. Ram. No, sir. He plays a little. Master. And Tarak. He knows a good deal. Yeah, he was a good tabla player, we hear. Master. Then he won't keep his eyes on the ground so much. If the mind is directed to something else, it doesn't dwell deeply on God. What does that mean? He won't keep his eyes on the ground so much. Yeah, but it's not a bad thing. This is a trade and a practice of some sadhus. They won't look all around because it's just curiosity. and to say, "Oh, this is beautiful, that's beautiful," and they may get attached to something, or so. Sometimes they'll just keep their eyes on the ground while walking, so that nothing will attract them. Some beautiful view, or some nice food is being served somewhere, or some pretty girl is walking by, whatever it is. So they'll keep their head down. So what he's saying is that this interest in the drums or something, the tabla, this may slightly pull his mind away from just diving deep into God. Of course, it didn't, but then he won't keep his eyes on the ground so much. If the mind is much directed to something else, it doesn't dwell deeply on God. Ram, I've been studying the drum only to accompany the kirtan. So he got a little embarrassed. He said, "No, I don't really have any interest in learning how to play. It's just for spiritual reasons when we have kirtan that I can play." Master, to him, "I hear that you two are taking singing lessons. Is that so?" Now, he didn't mind that. He encouraged them to sing. And he wanted them to buy a book of Ram Prasad songs, which he bought, and he brought one day there and everything. So he was happy when he heard that. But then was very shy, and he would get scoldings for not singing in public. He didn't like to sing before other people. "I hear that you two are taking singing lessons. Is that so?" M. "No, sir. I just open my mouth now and then." Master, have you practiced that song? "Oh, mother, make me mad with thy love." If you have, please sing it. This is the Brahmos song, but it captures the spirit of Thakur. This was our Trailokya Sanyal. He composed this after being influenced by Thakur, coming in close contact with him. And Thakur loved that song. It's a beautiful song. If you have, please sing it. The song expresses my ideal perfectly. Now, this is the end of this conversation. What does that mean? That means that M didn't do it. He was still too shy. Huh? It says the conversation turned to Hazrat. So M didn't bother to say that he wouldn't sing it, or he didn't sing it, or he did sing it. He just stops it right there. The conversation turned to Hazrat's hatred for certain people, which Ramakrishna did not like. Master, to the devotees, "I used frequently to visit a certain house at Kamarpukur. The boys of the family were of my age. The other day they came here and spent 2 or 3 days with me. Their mother, like Hazra, used to hate people. Then something happened to her foot, and gangrene set in. On account of the foul smell, no one could enter her room. I told the incident to Hazra and asked him not to hate anyone." So he's drawing some karmic connection. Yeah, you hate people, who knows what type of karma you'll get through that. Toward evening, as Ramakrishna was standing in the northwest corner of the courtyard, he went into samadhi. In those days, the master remained almost always in an ecstatic state. In those days, this is 1883. What we read and what Thakur says is that after his Vedantic experience, his Nirvikalpa Samadhi, that he remained in that state, with that mood of oneness, and the mind constantly going in and out of Samadhi. There weren't many devotees at that time. So not that he had some incentive to keep the mind down, to talk to them and everything. And later, through praying to the Divine Mother and everything, he went into this other type of mood. Even though there's a Bhavamukha, he was in that Bhavamukha state, but mostly pulled upward. Bhavamukha means you go back and forth between that Nirvikalpa state and coming down to the heart center where you see everything filled with God. But in those days, mostly pulled up and then gradually a little bit down. So now he's in this state where he'll go into this bhava, this ecstasy. Then he'll break his arm and he'll go into this other state, a little bit more, where seeing God everything, in everyone and within all beings, and everything is a manifestation of consciousness. So he had different moods at different times that he went through. And at the very end, he felt in Kashipur. Now I find my mind more and more merging in the infinite, formless, absolute reality, which to him meant that he was nearing the end. So M writes, in those days, the master remained almost always in an ecstatic state. He would lose consciousness of the world at the slightest suggestion from outside. This is Uddipan. He had that type of mind that was very open to spiritual suggestion, that anything that he associated with the divine would trigger that mood in his mind. There are many instances of that. At the slightest suggestion from outside, but for scant conversation with visiting devotees, he remained in an indrawn mood and was unable to perform his daily worship and devotions. Yeah, he had actually stopped working as a priest in the temples much earlier. Coming down to the relative world, he began to talk to the Divine Mother, still standing where he was. "O Mother," he said, "worship has left me and japa also. Please see, Mother, that I do not become an inert thing. Let my attitude toward God be that of the servant toward the master. O Mother, let me talk about thee and chant thy holy name. I want to sing thy glories. Give me a little strength of body that I may move about, that I may go to places where thy devotees live and sing thy name." In the morning, Sri Ramakrishna had been to the Kali temple to offer flowers at the mother's feet. So it's not exactly formal worship, but at least something. At least something. Continuing, the master said, "O Mother, I offered flowers at thy feet this morning. I thought, that is good. My mind is again going back to formal worship. Then why do I feel like this now? Why art thou turning me into a sort of inert thing?" In Jadavat, this Thakur used to talk about these God-realized souls falling into 4 different personality types. So this will be one. Those whose minds are constantly merging in God, so that they appear to be just like a log lying on the ground, with no signs of life or movement or anything. Jadavat. It's interesting. We find the Bhagavad has a verse about these 4, and Vivek Chudamani also has a verse about these 4 types. Like a child, like a ghoul, like a madman, like Unmadavat and Pishachavat and Bhagavat, a child, and like an inert thing. The moon had not yet risen. It was a dark night. The master, still in an abstracted mood, sat on the small couch in his room and continued his talk with the Divine Mother. He said, "Why this special discipline of the Gayatri?" Now look at this. Ishan is still in his mind. The conversation from yesterday. Who else could he be referring to? He had that long talk with the Ishan about this Gayatri, and no, it's better to do nowadays to worship God in the form of Divine Mother. And coming down from that ecstatic state, somehow the Ishan was still on his mind. Why this special discipline? That means Buddhist Charan. That's what he wanted to do. You start out with a certain number, increase it from new moon to full moon, and then decrease it back to new moon again. Why this jumping from this roof to that? Who told him to do it? In fact, Thakur told him not to do it. Perhaps he is doing it of his own accord. Well, he will practice a little of that discipline. So Thakur was resigned to it a little. The previous day, here it is, Sri Ramakrishna had discouraged Ishan about Vedic worship, saying that it was not suitable for the Kali Yuga. He had asked Ishan to worship God as the Divine Mother. The master said to M, "Are these all my fancies, or are they real?" M remained silent with wonder at the master's intimate relationship with the Divine Mother. He thought, she must be within us as well as without. Indeed, she must be very near to us, or why should the master speak to her in a whisper? Yeah, Thakur used to say, there was a story, one man was doing, I think, namaz very loudly. And someone came up to him and said, "Why are you doing it so loudly? Don't you know that the Lord can hear even the anklets on the feet of an ant?" That means that he's the nearest and closest to us. Okay, this is Wednesday. So this last one was a Sunday. So Wednesday, September 26th, 1883, one of the rare occurrences, rare instances where M is there in a weekday, aside from when he had a long break, either Christmas time or Durga Puja time. There were very few devotees with the master, for most of them came on Sundays. Rakal and Latu were living with him the greater part of the time. Yeah, they were all different times, different people stayed with him. Of course, ultimately Baburam ended up staying with him also, and some others at different times. M arrived in the afternoon and found the master seated on the small couch. The conversation turned to Narendra. Master to M, have you seen Narendra lately? With a smile. He said of me, he still goes to the Kali temple. He didn't like, he was still connected somewhat with the Brahmo Samaj, and they looked down very much on image worship in general, and his worship of Mother Kali in particular, this bloodthirsty goddess who had to be offered goat sacrifices and things, and very ghoulish looking and everything. So he thinks that, he's had this God realization, and still he does this primitive type of worship, idolatry type of thing. So Thakur is making fun of him. He said to me, he still goes to the Kali temple, but he will not when he truly understands. And Narendra was 19 years old at the time. His people are very much dissatisfied with him because he comes here now and then. They weren't the only ones. There were very few of the disciples whose parents were happy that they went to see him. He had this reputation of turning the minds of these young boys away from the world, so they won't want to get married, they won't want to have a job, they want to become sadhus and everything. So there was always a little fear of sadhus in India, that way. They'll take these young boys with them and kidnap them and take them and turn them into monks. The other day he came here in a hired carriage, and Surendra paid for it. Very generous man, Surendra. Narendra's aunt almost had a row with Surendra about it. The master left the couch and went to the northeast veranda where Hazra, Kishori, Rakal, and a few other devotees were sitting. Okay, now Kishori, I thought we haven't said too much about him. I thought I would give a little background. It's nice to know about these characters. Who was Kishori? Huh? Yeah. Okay. So Kishori Mohan Gupta. So he was the younger brother of M, and he was born in 1859. So say 4 years older than Swamiji, and also M, about 5 years younger than M. He was the only one in the family other than M who really became a close devotee of Sri Ramakrishna. So one of Thakur's householder devotees, and he met him first in 1882 and 1883, because as soon as M started coming, he knew this was one younger brother that he really liked and felt close to. Otherwise, he didn't get along with his brothers at all. At all. That was one of the reasons why he was always wanting to leave the joint family and have his own place and everything. Father, to a certain extent, mother and stepmother, and but most of the older brothers. But as one Kishori, they were on the same page, the two of them. So probably that M took him there for the first time, 1882 or 1883. Yeah, he was extremely devoted to Sri Ramakrishna, and would go there on a very regular basis, and would serve Sri Ramakrishna also. He was a very good singer. He had a very nice singing voice, and he would sing before Sri Ramakrishna on various occasions. Thakur liked the song very much. He was a very intimate member of the Brahmo Samaj also. There were many who were kind of half and half Brahmo Samaj members, but also devoted to Sri Ramakrishna. Actually, not so many who were so devoted to Sri Ramakrishna from the Brahmo Samaj. The ones that we know of left, of course, Rakal and Narendra and everything. So he remained devoted to Sri Ramakrishna throughout his whole life. At the very end, he lived alone in the house by himself and practiced austerities, and then passed away there. And how old was he? Passed away in 1931. So that's Kishori. We read about him very often, and M never once mentions that he's his brother. He just refers to him because M doesn't like to say anything about his own personal life and personal relations or anything. Half the time when he talks about his wife coming and his son dying and everything, he'll use a different pseudonym. He won't even say M. He'll say Mani, or he'll use some other, or just a devotee. So this Kishori was the younger M's younger brother. So the master left the couch and went to the northeast veranda where Hazra, Kishori, Rakal, and a few other devotees were sitting. Master to M. How is it that you are here today? Have you no school? M. Our school closed today at 1:30. Master. Why so early? M. Vidyasagar visited the school. He owns the school. So the boys get a half holiday whenever he comes. They're very clever, huh? So they'll be happy to see him. They know that they'll get time off from school. Master, why doesn't Vidyasagar keep his word? If one who holds the truth and looks on woman as his mother does not realize God, then Tulsi is a liar. This is a little Hindi thing. Do you know it? Anybody know it? Satyavachan, Parasri, there's something. Hari Prem. Something I say. Anyhow, I'll find it. Yeah, these are very common, these little couplets from Tulsi Das. Satyavachan, Parastri Matri Saman. Aise Hari na mile, Tulsi Jhut Jawan. Anyhow, people memorize these things, huh? People know lots of them. Huh? You also know some, huh? Prativa? Yeah. You learned them in school? Or? Yeah. Ah, okay. Anyhow, Thakur knew so many things. These little Hindi things also. These he had heard. So why doesn't Vidyasagar keep his word? Yeah, he said he would come to visit him. He didn't. If one holds the truth and looks on woman as his mother, if one who holds the truth and looks on woman as his mother does not realize God, then Tulsi is a liar. If a man holds the truth, he will certainly realize God. The other day, Vidyasagar said he would come here and visit me. That was after Thakur went to see him. But he hasn't kept his word. There's a big difference between a scholar and a holy man. Vidyasagar was not just a scholar, of course. He was very philanthropic and very much devoted to social reform, to the plight of widows and child widows and poor people and everything. He was a good. Thakur liked him very much and praised him. He said the work he's doing is very sattvic work, but he doesn't know the gold that's hidden within. If he did, he would withdraw a little bit from so much of that work. But he didn't like that he didn't keep his word. That is one thing. There's a big difference between a scholar and a holy man. The mind of a mere scholar is fixed on lust and gold, but the sadhu's mind is on the lotus feet of Hari. A scholar says one thing and does another, but it is quite a different matter with the sadhu. The words and actions of a man who has given his mind to the lotus feet of God are altogether different. In Benares, I saw a young sannyasi who belonged to the sect of Nanak. Now, we don't associate sannyasa with the Sikh Dharma very much, but Thakur makes several references to this Nanakpanthi sadhus, he calls them. One of his, if I remember correctly, I think one of his sons started a kind of a branch that's Udasi of monks. So there was some monastic tradition within the Sikh tradition, not exactly, a little kind of offshoot. So it could have been something like that. Otherwise, we don't hear much about that. Huh? Sikh sannyasis or anything?
There was one day, the Dera Sadhus, actually Dehradun.
Yeah.
The place is named after those sadhus that were, from Arjun Dev. After his sons were all, all his sons were killed. And then after that, they started that the Dera Baba.
In Benares, I saw a young sannyasi who belonged to the sect of Nanak. He was the same age as you. He's talking to him. He used to refer to me as a loving monk. His sect had a monastery in Benares. I was invited there one day. I found that the Mohand was like a housewife. I asked him, "What is the way?" For the Kali Yuga, he said, the path of devotion as enjoined by Narada. Now, this became one of the most important teachings that Thakur gave over and over and over again. The Kali Yuga, Naradiya Bhakti. So Thakur was not averse to picking up ideas from other people and would very, very often credit them with it. I heard this from this person, I heard it from that person. But the very important thing, there's no time now, but the next Friday, I want to talk a little bit about this Naradiya Bhakti, because this very nice commentary on the Gospel by Swami Bhudeshanandaji, this Ramakrishna Kathamrita Prashango, the introduction has a long section on this Naradiya Bhakti, what it means, and for Thakur. Very, very generally, it means it's pure devotion. When he talks about this pure devotion, not seeking for anything other than love of God. He was reading a book. This is the Nanak Panthi Sadhu. When the reading was over, he recited, Vishnu is in water, Vishnu is on land, Vishnu is on the mountaintop. The whole world is pervaded by Vishnu. At the end, he said, peace, peace, abiding peace. One day he was reading the Gita, so Thakur must have spent some time with him. He was so strict about his monastic rules that he would not read a holy book looking at a worldly man. So he turned his face toward me and his back on Mathur, who was also present. So this is when Mathur Babu took them all on pilgrimage. That's the only time he went, Thakur went to see these places. It was this holy man who told me of Narada's path of devotion as suited to the people of the Kali Yuga. M. Are not sadhus of his class followers of the Vedanta? Now we know that means non-dualism. This is the way this term was used by Sri Ramakrishna and by others at that time. So it means that M thinks that, he's talking about so much about devotion. Aren't they jnanis? Master, yes, they are, but they also accept the path of devotion. The fact is that in the Kali Yuga, one cannot wholly follow the path laid down in the Vedas. Once a man said to me that he would perform the Purushcharana of the Gayatri. Again, Ishan. Just once a man said to me, it's interesting, that he would perform the Purushcharana of the Gayatri. I said, Why don't you do that according to the Tantra? In the Kali Yuga, the discipline of Tantra is very efficacious. Okay, this goes on, but we can stop here. Page 297. Om Niranjaram Nityamanantarupam Bhaktanukambhathura Vigraham Vai Ishavataram Parameshamidhyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirisa Namaha. We bow our heads before Sri Ramakrishna, who is stainless, of infinite nature, whose heart melts in sympathy for his devotees, who is an embodiment of the divine and the Supreme Lord, and ever worthy of our worship. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.